Greetings, fanboys and fangirls. Jared here with another video from Fanboys Forever. And today I have the much requested, much anticipated Masters of the Universe Masterverse ranking video. I'm recording this video here in the middle of July in 2024, so for all those watching in the future, you'll know where we're at on the release schedule. Currently, as I'm recording, the last wave to be released was the wave with New Eternia Thunder Punch He-Man, as well as Revolution Battle Armor He-Man, and we are currently anticipating the wave with New Eternia Battle Armor Skeletor. Well, here we are in the middle of 2024, and several years have passed since the Masterverse line of 7-inch scaled MOTU figures began from Mattel all the way back in 2021, with the release of the first wave alongside that new Netflix Revelation series. I remember the hype surrounding that first wave very well. There was a lot of debate about exactly what Mattel was giving us and if it could really fill the spot of the vacant Masters of the Universe classics. At the outset, this line promised to show the evolution of He-Man, and it would visit MOTU through a variety of familiar and unfamiliar realities throughout the Masterverse. This was a wordplay on what's often called the multiverse in other media, where different versions of characters can coexist in separate realities. Those initial figures divided fans, but after a few bumps in the road, those who've stuck with the line throughout these 13 waves and numerous exclusives realize that this line represents arguably the finest that Mattel has to offer from the world of MOTU. That's why after many requests and a great many hours, not to mention a whole lot of money spent, just don't tell my wife, I finally decided to do my very first ranking of the thrilling Masterverse line. Before we begin, I do ask that you please consider subscribing and liking the video. This really helps me justify the many hours it took to complete, and my family and I really appreciate these simple steps. And if you're feeling very generous, you can always hit that thank you button. Also, be sure to comment, because I would love to hear your opinion down below. Let's begin by, as usual, laying out the ground rules for this list. Much like my Masters of the Universe origin lists, this list will be completely subjective. Now, I love the Masterverse line, and MOTU in general. It's my main toy collecting hobby. Even if I rank a figure very low on the list, that doesn't automatically mean it's awful. As a matter of fact, with Masterverse, I found it much more difficult to rank than my usual Origins lists, where there are several figures in that line that I find to be extremely weak. Whereas in Masterverse, it's a little bit harder to come up with those figures that miss the mark that much. In regards to which figures will be included in this list, that is any figure, including the Soul Beast release of Battle Cat that bears the Masterverse moniker, will be included with one exception, and that's the quite frankly bizarre Virgil Abloh collection of Revelation Masterverse art figures. These were extremely limited releases on Mattel Creations that are just recasts of some of the first figures in the line, so I don't really feel like they belong in this list. Remember, if you have a different ranking, I would love to hear about it below. It doesn't bother me a bit if you disagree with any of my rankings. Be sure to tell me about the ways that I got it wrong or the ways that I got it right. I'd love to hear about it down below. That's what makes our fandom so interesting. And I've really enjoyed hearing about all your different opinions regarding my Origins lists. So just a few stats before we start. By my count, there are 84 individual figures released, counting Battle Cat and counting the individual figures in 2-packs in the Masterverse line as of July 2024 when this video is being made. By my count, there were 43 good guys, and that is considering that Jitsu is a good guy in the New Eternia line. There are 41 bad guys. There are 70 male figures. There are 14 female figures. There are 11 He-Man figures. There are 9 Skeletor figures. There are 7 Princess of Power branded figures, and by that I mean that it has the Princess of Power logo on the front of the packaging. There are 2, count them 2, Rulers of the Sun figures. There are 3 New Adventures of He-Man figures. There are 2 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe CGI figures. There are 41 Netflix animation-based figures from both Revelation and Revolution. And that breaks down to 33 Netflix Revelation figures and 8 Netflix Revolution figures. There are 23 new Eternia figures. There are 3 Masters of the Universe 87 movie figures, 4 if you count the upcoming Beastman. And last but not least, there are, count 'em, 0 Snake Men. So it's funny that the faction that has gotten the very most love in Masters of the Universe Origin appears to have been, well, purposely left out of Masterverse so as not to have the 2 lines have an oversaturation. Alright, and starting at the bottom of our list. I will say it was much harder to figure out a bottom of the list figure for Masterverse, because I really didn't think that any of these figures deserved to be completely derided or seen as something horrible, but in the end I had to go with something that I guess was completely unremarkable to me. So at number 84, I had to go with Masters of the Universe Revelation Merman 1.0. Now, very unfortunately, this was the bottom of the list figure for me because it kind of committed the cardinal sin of taking a character design that I really like, and rather than adding something to it, actually took away some of the things that gave it its primary identity. So if you're familiar with the series, this is how Merman looks in the modern era during that show, whereas in the flashbacks he has his vest and he looks more traditional. Instead, I always kind of saw this as a little bit of a bare bones release since he was lacking his chest armor and a lot of the things that just make him Merman, in my opinion, causing the 2.0 version of this figure to, in my opinion, completely eclipse this initial release, which is what landed him at number 84 at the bottom of the list. And again, it gives me no pleasure to say that at number 83, near the bottom of the list, it's new Eternia Jitsu. Now, the sad thing about this is actually a figure that I like quite a bit. I think that it looks really nice and it presents well. I think the details are good and they did a great job on the head sculpt. So many things I like here. However, much like with Merman, there were certain things subtracted from the character, but in this case, there was a whole lot added to the character as well. This was around the beginning of the line, when I think Mattel was still trying to figure out what the new Eternia branch of the figures would be exactly, so they switched Jitsu's allegiance to being a good guy, and for that reason, they've changed some things. I think that they changed a few things maybe to where the figure wouldn't be as offensive, but in doing so, they've fundamentally kind of altered what makes Jitsu Jitsu in some ways. And even though you can take off a lot of the extra armor, it still doesn't exactly pass for that classic Jitsu look. And for that reason, it is near the bottom of the list at number 83, unfortunately. And at number 82, I feel bad about putting this guy so low on the list, but it is the inaugural figure in the line. That is the original Masters of the Universe Revelation He-Man. I mean, I think it's well documented at this point exactly what went wrong with this guy. For one thing, he's about as jaundiced as you can get for a He-Man figure, with a bizarrely yellow skin tone throughout the figure. Also, the head sculpt is slightly disconcerting, with a little bit of a strange smile going on. I think he's a little too slender to be my ideal version of He-Man, and that combined with the overwhelming yellow color, as well as some weird joint stuff that they hadn't worked out at the beginning of the line, especially with some of the ways the hips were constructed, it really shows the age of this figure, and that Mattel really didn't have it all figured out right at the beginning, meaning that this guy ended up near the bottom of the list. And right beside of him is his counterpart, Masters of the Universe Revelation Skeletor. This too suffers from a lot of the same problems as the He-Man we just mentioned. For one, there's definitely some strangeness about the color that they chose to go with on the face, which I think a lot of Skeletor and He-Man's problems are both situated around the idea that they were probably working with very early concept material. Skeletor also, just like He-Man, doesn't possess the exact amount of bulk, but it's not nearly as bad on Skeletor since he's not supposed to be as large as He-Man is anyway. He also has a lot of the same strange joint tolerance problems in the hips, and is overall just kind of dated looking and doesn't exactly match the cartoon model sheet that we would see in the show, which would actually end up being quite a bit more traditionally true to that original look for Skeletor that we all know and love. For that reason, this is just a victim of being an early part of the line. At number 80, we have Horde Skeletor. Now, here's the thing about Horde Skeletor. In a lot of ways, this is quite an improvement from that original Skeletor we just looked at. He certainly does have this soft goods cloak that's a little more epic than the little soft goods cape that we saw on that first Skeletor, and certainly a much better, more accurate head sculpt. However, I think that this one suffers greatly from being a figure that, at least in my opinion, was completely unnecessary to be made in the first place. I would have much more understood its inclusion in the line had it came with maybe a Keldor head or had some more accessories, but for me, making a figure of a flashback character that we only see for a few seconds really doesn't add a whole lot to the line. And even though usually I'm the first person to say that we need figures of these small appearance characters, I found this one to be extremely redundant, and one of the only figures in the Masterverse line that I may not have really even cared if they hadn't ever released it. And at number 79, we have Masters Universe Revelations Spikor. Now, who knows, maybe all the Spikor fans out there are going to gang up on me for putting him so low on the list, but I just can't help it. Spikor really didn't have very much of a role in the Masters of the Universe Revelation series, and other than that, in all honesty, Spikor has always been one of my least favorite designs in Masters. It's just a character that I don't think visually works as well as hardly any of the other villains, and it's really no fault of the figure that he ends up being this low on the list. It just so happens that Spikor is one of my least favorite of the original Masters characters. Other than that, it's a perfectly fine figure, but it doesn't necessarily do anything to distinguish itself from any other version released, especially the classics. At number 78, it's Revelation Beastman. Again, I'll say that really there's nothing necessarily wrong with this figure or the way it's executed. As a matter of fact, I think the sculpting is really nice on this guy, and he looks great from every angle that you put him in. However, much like Merman, I will say that he was one of my very least favorite redesigns from the entire show. And just like Merman again, they took away some of the very essential things that made his character look the way that he looked and made him recognizable. They took away the chest harness, so it kind of ends up looking like a naked version of Beastman. Now, I will say that I think the design looks good just from a character design standpoint, and I think there's nothing necessarily wrong with what they did, but if you're looking for the iconic kind of Beastman look that we all know and love, this figure just doesn't have it. And just as I was displeased with his redesign in the show, I was also displeased with it in figure form. However, if it's a design you like, you can bump this guy way, way up. But for me, it just didn't work. At number 77, it's Revelation Deluxe Faker. This was a Target exclusive figure that would end up being extremely and heavily discounted as it was completely overstocked. What a lot of people may not realize is around the time of its initial release, people were incredibly scared that it may be really difficult to get a hold of. That certainly didn't turn out to be the case, and especially after people watched Revelation and figured out that Faker had very, very little of a role in the show, especially in this form. For one thing, this design for Faker really takes away pretty much every bit of the classic elements of what made that character special in the first place. Gone is the cool, kind of red hair and the blue skin and all the things that we love seeing about Faker. And instead, they pretty much turned him into a Masters of the Universe Terminator. However, the only thing that kind of moves him up on this list a little bit is he came with some pretty cool He-Man heads. However, this figure would have been much further up on the list had they not painted the eyes on those He-Man heads red, meaning that you really couldn't use them with your base He-Man and finally get rid of that strange grinning head that came on that first release. Because of that missed opportunity and the weird decision to do something that was so far from what we know and love about Faker, he's definitely low on this list. And at number 76, it's Revelation Roboto. Now, this may actually be the first entry on the list to get me in a lot of trouble with people in the comments, and that's okay, because I'm just going to be as honest as I can about what I'm seeing here. For this, I will say that it's a combination of elements that ends up making this pretty low on the list for me. For one, a whole lot of the samples that I saw, including mine, have had some weird paint things going on the inside of the chest. He has the transparent chest, as you might expect, and mine always had a fleck of red paint in there that really bothered me in a spot that it shouldn't be in, and there was simply no way to fix it. Not only that, but on a whole lot of the joints on the figure, especially around the arms up here, there's big kind of globs of paint in a way. This makes it really, really difficult to switch out the hand implements. As you can see, as I turn this one, it never did go in all the way, and that was with me struggling mightily with it. A whole lot of the other joints were pretty frozen up as well, and this one ends up kind of feeling like there was definitely some defective elements of how they put the figure together. So this one is much less about me maybe not being crazy about the design and more about just the way the figure came together. The other thing is I always have a hard time reconciling the idea that the transparency in the chest is worth getting rid of a whole lot of that ab crunch articulation. In this case, I feel like it was still plenty possible for them to have integrated it, and they just didn't. Beyond that, I still think it's an alright figure, even if I'm not the biggest fan in the world of the Roboto design that they went in the show. For me, it seems a little slender, and it seems maybe that it lacks some of the kind of chunky charm of that original 80s figure, although I love Roboto's role in the show. At number 75, it's Princess of Power Catra. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that I've never been the world's biggest Princess of Power fan, and for me, getting a lot of those characters into a He-Man line isn't necessarily the biggest priority. But I've always liked Catra, and of course she's one of the main characters from that show, and it's always great to get a female villain of any sort in this line. I do think Mattel has done a good job here. I really like what they did with the mask and how you can actually still use it as the crown and all of that, and I think that her accessories are nice. I do think she ends up looking a little flat in terms of some of the colors used, and I think maybe a few silver highlights might have done the job to have homaged to that original figure slightly. The other thing is that she does have a really hard time standing up. So once again, just like with Roboto, this time there are some like mechanical reasons why maybe this one didn't turn out the best. But I still think she's a decent figure, even if Catra isn't necessarily for me. I think they did a good job with her, and I appreciate that they had a pretty nice purple soft goods cape there. So this one is probably more down to personal tastes. And at number 74, it's everybody's favorite character, Pighead. Look, I'm definitely one of those people that thought that it was really cool that Mattel was able to get the Rulers of the Sun figures into Masters. Not only did they do it in Origins, but they found a way to get at least two characters, Pighead and Sunman, into Masterverse, so I've always really appreciated that. If I had to say that any of the figures in this line felt like maybe they were slightly out of place or maybe didn't necessarily belong with the others, it's probably Pighead. Even though I think they did a fine job with what they had to work with, I think he does end up feeling slightly distant from that original Pighead figure. Not that I think most people would care, but he does kind of feel like a different thing altogether. I do appreciate that they try to spruce up a few elements of this guy, but in the end, this one is just me kind of not feeling as much of an attachment to the character, even though I think they did a pretty good job here. At number 73 is poor old Revelation Mossman. Perhaps there has never been a Masters of the Universe figure show up in the absolute quantities that this guy has at Ollie's discount stores. It's almost alarming to think that there were this many unsold Mossmen from that initial wave of Masters. And this greatly saddens me because I actually think this figure is pretty cool. I think that it has a really nice, dedicated, one-time use only sculpt that would be a real rarity for the rest of the line. And I think it's great that Mattel was able to commemorate the character by having him in that first wave when maybe their tooling budget was a little higher. But I definitely think that there are a few issues here. For one thing, his head is definitely anything but neutral, kind of in this yelling position. So I definitely think this would have been a great time to have had an alternate head. I probably would have rather had an alternate head than the vine hand that he's included here because, as you can see, he cannot support the weight of that hand in almost any way that you pose it. Not only can the figure itself not support it, but the wrist actually has a hard time supporting it. As you can see, it just kind of flops around. So I definitely think that there should have been a little more work put into the engineering side on the hand. It is very possible to balance him to get it to hold, but it usually never lasts for too long. However, I still think it's a pretty cool figure, even if the sculpt far outpaces the paintwork that they were able to do. Perhaps just one wash would have really transformed the way this figure looked, because as it stands without a wash over all those intricate little details, the bare plastic on a lot of the green parts ends up making him look a little cheaper than he should. And it would have been nice to have seen them spring for that. Not to mention, there's no flocking anywhere on the figure, which is pretty much a critical element of Mossman's identity. Still, it probably pains me most of all to put this figure this low on the list, because I personally always really liked the way this guy looked and turned out. At number 72, it's Revelation Teela. I actually never had too much of a problem with the redesign of Teela for the show. I know a whole lot of people, said that it was woke or whatever. I never really bought into any of that. Instead, for me, it's really more about this figure maybe not being as instantly recognizable as a classic Teela. It's also about a strange defect that mine always had, and I've seen this on a few other samples as well. If you look closely at the head sculpt, there's a plastic seam line. There's a join going through the forehead up there. And it's really strange, and I'm not even sure it's very visible, but it's something that I've always noticed in a way that the figure was assembled. Even though this figure does a really good job of matching the animation model, the expression is almost a little too neutral. This Teela was usually extremely fierce in all of her battle scenes, and especially in some of those final battles. So I would have liked to have seen her have a little bit more ferocity in that head sculpt. Other than that, she's a pretty good representation of Teela from the show, but it's a little one-dimensional on what you can actually do with the figure because it's in a very specific context. And at number 71, we have Revelation Orko. In my opinion, Orko in Revelation is one of the very best characterized elements of the show. Orko does so much to endear himself to the audience and prove that he's really the heart of the Masters of the Universe, and I think that this figure does a pretty good job. He comes with a nice little transparent stand. It kind of reminds me of what they did for the 2000X version of Orko. He can pop right off of that stand if you need him to. He has a little bit of articulation with kind of a ball joint and hinge situation there. Of course, the head can kind of bounce around as much as you need to. I think that it looks pretty good. The one thing that I will say is I've always thought that this design kind of left a little bit to be desired. I've always thought that it was weird to see Orko with long, spindly arms that were kind of thin and gnarled. I've always thought that the eyes were maybe a little too cat-like. So there's just a couple of things for me that kind of brings him down a little bit. And I think later on when they did the redesign of Orko that would actually improve what they did quite a bit. But for me, this one's more down to personal taste. At number 70, we have another heavily discounted figure that they had a really hard time moving off the shelves, and that was Revelation Battle Cat. Now, typically in all of my other lists, I wouldn't really include beasts and vehicles and things like that, but seeing as how this is the only rideable thing, or beast, or vehicle, or whatever you want to say, in the entire line, plus Battle Cat is very much a character, I definitely thought that I would go ahead and give him a slot here. Now, I really like this. I think that they did a good job, and I think that it's really nice looking. I think that it's recognizable as Battle Cat, and they had lots of articulation in this thing. Mattel actually put forth an incredible effort with this guy. However, there were some things in production that never quite sat right with me, and I did have to go through a couple before I could get one that had at least a decent QC job. For one thing, if you look on the helmet here, they always had a really hard time getting the eyes aligned correctly. This was the very best I ever found, and it made it even more of a nightmare because the ones you would find in store you could only see one side of. So you can see that this eye isn't applied as directly as this one is. And the other problem was that on the saddle itself, there would be all kinds of little paint imperfections and little bubble points and things. You can see a few of those over there as well. Overall, it was kind of strange, the production process that they went through. You can even see here that on this decorative element of the saddle that there's a little bit of paint rub. So it was nearly impossible to find one that was pretty much perfect. That frustration with the way the production samples turned out made it pretty difficult for me to consider this one of the better parts of the line, even though I think in concept it ought to be. Still, if you don't own this guy, I would, even though he's a little bit lower on the list, still suggest that you check him out, especially for a discounted price. And at number 69, I promise this is not a joke, it's Revelation Fisto. Now don't let his lower place on the list fool you. I actually like this figure quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I think it's remarkably unremarkable. And that's a good thing here, because there was some kind of production problem in the original Classics line version of Fisto, and a whole lot of people didn't end up getting a Classics Fisto, including me. So lots of people were looking forward to finding a way to own one that would work as kind of a replacement in that line and be in a similar scale. Now, I would say that I'm not exactly sure that you can do that style-wise with this Fisto, but the truth is that this is as close as me and hundreds of other fans, maybe even thousands, are ever going to be at owning a Classics Fisto, and I think for that reason this does the job. I'm especially fond of the head sculpt and the work they put into it, but there's a few little problems with the figure itself. One of them is the metal fist. Now, from what I can tell, this is like a cold cast metal right here, and I think it's great that they included it on the figure, and it looks awesome. However, it's worth noting that the extra weight can make him a little hard to pose sometimes, and can make him a little forward heavy, I should say. Now, if you pose it correctly, and you have it down like this, or up like this, it's not going to make much of a difference. But when you bring it out, that's when you start to have some problems. Now, I don't mind that too much, but the other thing is some of the silver paintwork on the figure. It's very, very difficult to hide that there's some obvious kind of brush strokes going on here on the armor. So at this point, I don't think Mattel had really perfected their updated back metallization process that they would end up implementing in a lot of Origins figures. So I think that this figure really could have benefited from something like that. Other than that, it is a really nice figure. And just because it was, kind of unremarkable, didn't really reinvent the wheel, he just ended up a little lower on the list, and from some of the balancing issues. Still though, I highly suggest him, especially if you never got the Classics version. And at number 68, it's New Adventures Slushhead. Even though this figure is low on the list, believe it or not, I am a huge New Adventures of He-Man fan, and I love so many of the original characters created for that, especially Slushhead right here. And I personally think that visually, this is completely brilliant, and a huge upgrade over the Masters of the Universe Classics version. So, with all of that being said, why is this Target exclusive figure so low on the list for me? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? Well, if you're one of the people who own this figure, you probably know what I'm going to say. The material that was used in the tentacles back here is almost completely defective. As a matter of fact, the first one I got out of the box, as soon as I freed it from its plastic, one of the claws broke in two. After I posed one of these tentacles back here, the implement completely broke off. Whatever this plastic was, it's not really bendy or anything like that. It was, well, garbage. So it's one of the worst material failures in the entire line. And it's such a shame too, because Slushhead here is an incredibly versatile deluxe figure. Not only does he come with two different head sculpts, but he can even do the Mr. Freeze thing about having the head detach and kind of have tentacle arms. But the sad part is I'm never going to really try a bunch of those features, because now I know just how fragile these tentacle pieces are all over the back. Not only that, but it makes him very back heavy, so he has a hard time standing in almost any pose. And if you, of course, detach this big thing, you're going to get away from, having that issue. However, again, I will say that I'm very, very timid about messing with any of that, because this figure really should have been much, much higher on the list, and it's let down by the materials that were used. And at number 67, it's Revelation Sorceress. Now, this figure really doesn't have a whole lot of problems to speak of. She's really a pretty good representation of your traditional sorceress in colors that any fan of the cartoon or the old mini comics and original toys would find pretty familiar. So why does she end up a little bit lower on the list? For one thing, she's just a little bland. There's really not a whole lot to separate her from the pack, and I think a little bit of paint wash would have went a long way in making some of these feathers on the shoulders and things really stand out. Not only that, but mine, and I'm not sure if anybody else had this problem, had a little hole punched through the bottom in the plastic to secure the figure in through her dress portion, which I always thought was really bizarre. Of course, even though the cape does some really cool things, they did have to use some elastic bands to attach it, and I think it works pretty well, but might be a little visually distracting. I think overall she's a really cool figure, but in the end, I think that it's that blandness and maybe even the neutrality of the head sculpt that just seems to make her maybe a little less dynamic than a lot of the other figures in the line. Still though, she's a fine representation of the sorceress from Revelation. And at number 66, we have Revelation Evil Lyn from the very first wave. Evil Lyn here was always, I think, what most people considered to be the best one out of that initial wave, and that's why she ranks quite a bit higher than all the others. Not only was she right proportionally, and she had good accessories and an alternate head, and she matched her animation model while still standing on her own, I just think it's a really cool look for Evil Lyn. Of course, it does include the more traditional Evil Lyn portrait as well, but I've always liked giving her the unhelmeted look because it's more of a special kind of appearance for Evil Lyn. And I've always really just liked the design of this outfit for the character. I do think it's interesting that they have yet to ever do a traditional original look Evil Lyn that we see in the flashbacks, even though we've had several versions of Evil Lyn. So I do think this is a cool figure, but at the same time isn't quite as interesting or varied as later female figures would be, especially other versions of Evil Lyn that we'll get to in time. But still, a cool figure if you enjoyed that look. At number 65, we have Revelation Andra. Now, this was a controversial character in the show because they had taken a character from, I think, some of the British magazine comics or mini comics, I don't even know, and they had changed some things about her and made her a new character for this show. Personally, I never was upset or offended by any of that, and I always really liked Andra in the series. And I think that this figure does a fine job of representing her. She has a really cool head sculpt. I really like the accessories she comes with. I think that the soft goods cloak works really well, and she even has like a cool masked head as well. I think the only problem that I have is because Andra isn't as well established in the lore, especially this new version of the character, that it ends up being a little more forgettable for me personally than some of the other figures. However, that doesn't mean that she isn't a really well executed figure and a good representation of what we saw in the animation. So yeah, I actually like this one quite a bit. And at number 64, we have Sunman from the Rulers of the Sun subset. Now, I actually think that this is a pretty cool redesign that they've come up with. I really like a lot of the details on the costume. I think the gold paint, which sometimes doesn't work out very well for action figures, turned out pretty good, aside from a few little sloppy parts on the front. I really do like the lime green that they have in there with that bright red, and I think that it ends up making a really nice visual for the figure. I also especially like these big articulated wings that Sunman has, and I think they're pretty cool, even if they kind of stray from how those wings were presented on the original toy. And that leads to some of my only complaints about the figure. The Sunman design itself from the original toy line is by far the most iconic thing to come out of that. I've always loved how Sunman looks on that original toy. But they have made some changes here that definitely kind of makes this guy feel like more of his own thing. However, I also realize that Sunman is in great need of being updated, and especially with things like the hairstyle they chose here, I think that they did a good job updating that character. So for me, I was always a little stuck between this is being a nice update while also feeling like I wish that it looked a little more like that original Sunman character. However, I think to be what it is, it's still a really nice looking figure, and I highly suggest it, as he is one of them that tends to be discounted quite a bit, and you should be able to find a really good deal on this guy. So I do like this version of Sunman. And he's got that high top fade. At number 63, we have by far one of the most recent figures in the line, and that's the Princess of Power Leech. Hated to put him so low, but here's the thing about Leech. He has an excellent sculpt, and I really do think he turned out beautifully. But unfortunately, one of the things that can be a little confusing about this guy is the color scheme and some of the sculptural choices that Mattel went with. Even though the sculpt is absolutely brilliant with all kinds of texture and little suckers and things all over his tongue, and so many other little details, unfortunately, the shade of green they went with does not necessarily match the Filmation counterpart. Now here's the thing. You may be thinking, well, why should it? Well, most of their Princess of Power figures with that branding on it have aimed at giving us a modern sculpt while matching the color schemes and overall design aesthetic of the Princess of Power She-Ra cartoon. As many of you all know, Leech here does not quite have the right shade of green. Instead, they've opted for more of a lime when he should have been a little more of a turquoise, maybe even slightly blue in a way. I can understand why Mattel maybe wanted to make him a little more recognizable as Leech the toy and wanted to kind of straddle the line between the two, but it may be one of those situations where in trying to please everyone, they ended up pleasing very few. Even though I think Leech is still a cool looking figure, I think having the identity crisis about the color definitely hurt his prospects to be what I think he could have been. At number 62, it's a Revelation 2.0 Merman. It's hard to believe that there's this much distance between the two Revelation Mermen from this list. Of course, poor old Merman 1.0 was at the very bottom of the list, but that's because, like I said, he felt like a fairly incomplete figure, lacking his chest armor and a lot of the trappings of the costume that kind of makes Merman Merman. Well, this one fixes pretty much all of that. We definitely have a Merman that we all recognize. He has every bit of the regalia and armor that we expect, and there's some really great paint effects going on here too that helps to emphasize the armor and some of the little craggly bits. And especially nice is his sword. I really do like the texturing on that, and it doesn't lose anything in terms of articulation either. This is still one of the very best Merman figures that you can get. However, we'll see how the new Eternia version fares as it's just about to come out. I'd say perhaps if I could change anything about the figure just from an action figure perspective, it would be to have a head sculpt that was just a little more detailed. I know that this is meant to match the animation model, but for my own personal tastes, I think that that would help. And at number 61 is New Eternia Barbarian Skeletor. Now, I actually believe that this is a really good version of the character. I think that they did a great job selecting some elements from Skeletor's original design and some of those old Mark Taylor drawings. Especially, I like the goatee and the helmet and things and the extra chest armor, but there's a couple of little problems holding it back. For one thing, the chest armor doesn't like to set where it should a lot of the time, and it ends up kind of, I think, being pulled backwards by the cape a lot in doing that, when it probably should look more like this. It's a really minor thing to be worried about, but it's certainly still there. I also think that the black cape would have been much better served as being the same dark shade of purple as the rest of the armor. I do appreciate that it comes with an Alfredo Alcala Skeletor head that you can use, which is definitely more prominent in the upcoming Skeletor with Throne set that they have coming out. But I still think this is a pretty cool Skeletor figure, especially for anybody who's always liked those old Mark Taylor drawings, and I think that it's a pretty cool one. And at number 60, it's New Eternia Zodak. Of course, this figure falls into the same category as that original Jitsu, to where they were both early New Eternia figures when Mattel was still trying to figure out exactly what to do with that branding. However, I've always felt that Zodak fares much better than that Jitsu did. In this case, Zodak here ends up feeling a whole lot more like the original toy, meaning that if you just take the shoulder pads off and maybe the holster for the weapon, then you pretty much got a classic Zodak, even having the monster feet and all. And I really like that. I especially think that this might be the best Zodak head sculpt we've ever gotten in any line. So he definitely has a little more going for him. Unlike Jitsu, they didn't really do a whole lot to change up the design either. Instead, in some ways, I feel like they've, for lack of a better term, completed the design of that original figure. I love the extra little gray stripe that they have on the shoulder pads there, and I really do like that extra holster, which really can store his classic blaster. Having the staff accessory from the 2000X Zodak, with a K I might add, was a really cool option as well, and something that I really appreciated. I think this is a cool figure, and I really love the addition of the extra loincloth, which although it isn't removable, I think looks really nice. So I actually think that in a lot of ways this is an improvement on the original design, and I'm one of the people that absolutely loves having the shoulder pads on, as I think it ends up looking really cool for the figure. But I also think that he could have used just a hair more paint in some areas, especially maybe some washing on the fur, maybe on the chest and things, just to bring out a few of those highlights. Especially important would be bringing out the cool details on the belt. So it's kind of a figure that I think is better than the lack of paint gives it credit for, but is still a really nice addition. Plus, check this out on the back. How cool is it that the shoulder pads are being held in by those clips? I just think that's a really neat way of securing shoulder pads on a figure. And look at that, no shoulder pads, no problem. Looks just like classic Zodak. At number 59 is New Eternia Viking He-Man. Now here's a cool rendition of He-Man. I really love how it leans into some of those design elements that we saw in the original prototype and some of the original drawings for He-Man, especially having the horned helmet on the head. I really do like those gold shoulder pads, and even though maybe I would have liked a deeper hue on that gold, it still ends up looking pretty nice. I do think it's interesting that they went with more of this cloth loincloth rather than the furry shorts, and even though I would have preferred the furry shorts, it's still pretty cool to see them this way. This also has an alternative He-Man head that was always a little harshly judged by the fandom. I've always thought that this ended up looking like a cool figure. If it hadn't been for being shown up by other He-Men kind of later on in the line, I really do think this guy would be a lot higher up on the list. He's just always one that I've really appreciated, and I've always thought that they did some pretty cool work on the design, especially for how easy it is to remove these shoulder pads and pop on that traditional He-Man head. So like Skeletor, he ends up being a good combination of standard He-Man as well as Mark Taylor concept. Next up, we have Revelation Savage He-Man. This is a figure that I always felt was pretty harshly judged by the fans. For whatever reason, I always think that it seems like it got a lot of judgment, even though I think it largely succeeds at what it was trying to do. For one, I really do like the more bulked out chest piece that they use for He-Man. As we know in the series, he's supposed to be kind of more like the Hulk here. I definitely like the head sculpt a lot more than that first He-Man that we got. I always think this one is a lot more serious. And I love the long hair, and I really do love that wash work. Now, this is also kind of a bad thing too, because the wash work looks really good in some spots and it looks pretty rough in others. This is something that can either turn out really good or it can go really wrong, as we'll see in a couple of other examples. I still think that overall that wash work looks really nice and ends up keeping him from looking so generic, but maybe they should have toned it down just a little bit. He also has incredible barefoot sculpts down here, which kind of gives him that savage look. The only thing I will say is once we saw the actual animation version of this guy, it became obvious that he was supposed to be even bigger than this. So that's the one thing that I think they were probably working off of early concepts, and this already deluxe 2-pack He-Man should have probably been even bigger. Other than that though, I really do think that he's a good representation of what happened on the show, and I really love these hand sculpts as he absolutely kicks the tar out of Skelegod in the show. Which leads me to my next pick. At number 57, it's Deluxe Revelation Skelegod. This is a figure that when I think about how badly it bombed, it kind of upsets me a little bit, to be honest. I really think that this is a completely awesome Skeletor figure, and it really hurt to see it pretty much discounted down to nothing everywhere I went later on. To me, this figure had it all. Really cool sculpt, really deluxe size, super intimidating. It looks enough like Skeletor to still recognize who it is, cool soft goods cape, and it had the benefit of having some incredible animation behind it, especially those fights between he and Savage He-Man. But for some reason, this design really didn't speak to people. Perhaps it's the off-putting nature of seeing the big H on Skeletor's chest, which doesn't bother me at all. Maybe it's that he has kind of a pin-headed head sculpt up there, which wasn't maybe represented in the show as much. Maybe it's the idea that he's even bigger somehow in the show than he is here. I'm not sure what it was, but this probably proves that maybe people aren't willing to accept very much deviation from that original Skeletor design. So to me, this is definitely not the fault of the designers of the figure. And even though I think the ankle joints needed a little work because he's still a little wobbly and sometimes I have a little bit of difficulty getting him to hold his poses, I still think he's a great figure. It is worth noting that in my original review, he actually had 2 of the same upper hips, meaning that you could tell from the straps that it was just a duplicate. So I did have to eventually get another one. Just a funny little mess up that kind of hampered my enjoyment of the figure originally. Still, if you don't have one, get one for a discounted price. You'll love it. And at number 56, it's a figure that should have been much higher on this list. It's Deluxe 1987 movie He-Man. I still have it fairly high on the list because of just what a great figure it is from the neck down. Unfortunately, this has probably one of the most atrocious He-Man head sculpts I've ever seen in my life. For my money, that looks nothing, absolutely nothing, like Dolph Lundgren. Perhaps if you kind of, unfocus your eyes a little bit, you can kind of maybe sort of see movie He-Man, but once you get a better look, yeah, that's horrible. However, I will say that because it's just this horrendous head sculpt that's really hurting things, the additional head sculpt he included was quite a bit better, even though it pretty much just looks like a regular toy He-Man. It's almost like Mattel knew the head sculpt was so bad they had to give you something else to put on the figure. However, let me show you what the figure looks with its full potential unlocked. Here he is with the Ramen Toys He-Man head sculpt, which I think might be long sold out, so I am very sorry about that. You can watch a full review here on the channel. And as you can see, it transforms a figure that is mid-tier at best to one that probably would have been in the top 10 of this list. So it is a real shame, but I refuse to rank the figure based on a third-party accessory, and something that I just feel would be unethical to do. Such a shame though, because I feel like all the other details here even sort of beats out what Super 7 ended up doing years ago. It's just a shame that it didn't come together quite like this for that initial release. At 55, we have Revolution Deluxe Trapjaw. This was, I believe, a Target exclusive figure, and was a great representation of the character from the cartoon. Especially cool is that he included a completely different outfit with sculpted and soft good components to make him a member of the motherboard cult. That is something that is a big deal in that show. So I really do appreciate all of those things. I think that the one thing that ended up holding him back is some of the choices made with the head sculpt. Even though in the actual show, he looks a lot more traditional, on this head sculpt, it's almost like he has his tongue sticking out. And so as you can see, it ends up looking a little odd whenever you have this part of the jaw down. I think other than that, it was a really good figure, but since they have come out with the new Eternia version of the character, it kind of loses its luster a little bit for me, and I tend to keep him situated with Motherboard in his cult costume. At number 54 might be one of the most valuable figures and hardest to find figures in the entire line, and that's New Eternia Web Store. This is a weird situation because I have no idea why this figure became so difficult to get a hold of. I don't know if it's a situation like Classics Fisto had, where there was some kind of production problem and Mattel couldn't roll a lot of these through, but either way, I really hope that Mattel does end up making an easier way for people to get a hold of this guy, because he's a figure that I really like. He's very classic. He certainly looks exactly like what you would expect Web Store to look like. I really do like the eyes and how they're transparent. I like the tendrils on the back and how you can pose them up. I especially like the dry brushing effect right there on the furry underwear. And especially cool is this awesome grappling hook, to where you can actually pose the hooks around and they're on hinges and the rope is in the back. Not only that, but you can even pull out the back and you can use this as a way to thread it through the line here, and so that he can do some zip lining, and you can see the little holes where it fits through. This was an awesome figure, and it's such a shame that a lot of people apparently will never get a chance to get their hands on him. So Mattel, I hope that you realize that there are lots of people looking for this guy, and he's pretty cool. However, because of the poor distribution, and because he doesn't bring a whole lot new to the table, he is still a little bit in the mid part of the list. At number 53, we have Revelation Man-at-Arms. What can I say? Upon the initial release of this figure, I was taken aback at just how high quality this guy really was. He did so many things right for being a traditional man-at-arms. I always really appreciated how awesome looking and bulky the sculpt was, and he seemed to be the antithesis of all the things that were wrong with that original Revelation He-Man figure from the first wave. The head sculpt was always completely awesome as well. He ended up being a great traditional version of Man-at-Arms. I think one of the only things that kind of ended up holding him back was that later on we would see an even better version of Man-at-Arms to kind of take his spot as a traditional version of the character in the line. Other than that though, I still really respect what they were able to do here and how good that this armor really does look, even if maybe he suffers from a little bit of a small head sculpt. At number 52, we have Revolution Skeletech. I think Mattel did a really good job bringing this guy to life in 3 dimensions. I really think that this is a cool design from the show, and I especially like that they include the crown here that Skeletor has stolen, and you can place it right on his head like he tends to wear in the show. I definitely think that he's much better than the other animated versions of Skeletor that we've gotten. He's a lot more model accurate, and it appears that Mattel was able to get a whole lot of the design work a lot earlier this time so that they could create a figure that was much more accurate to the source by the time it came out to coincide with the show. I especially like his robotic Darth Maul legs right there. And I think it's cool that he even has what I would call a metallo kind of kryptonite bay right there in the middle of his robotic chest. Even the arm itself over here has some bendy elements to it, and there's even a little bit of customization as you can move some of the pieces around and even open up his Havoc hand, I guess we'll call it. So I think that that's really neat. I do think the figure is a little limited because of this bendy arm. There's not really a whole lot of motion you can get out of it. You can certainly get a little bit, but it's the kind of thing that I would feel uncomfortable pushing very far. The other thing is that, of course, this kind of kilt piece does inhibit the legs a little bit, especially on this side over here. So there is something sacrificed for just the visual of the figure, but it's a really impressive visual, and that's really the main reason why he ends up a little bit higher on the list than you might expect. And at number 51, we have the Princess of Power Shadow Weaver figure. So this is a figure that ranks really highly for me. One of the main reasons that it's climbed the list like it has is that this figure is a great substitute for one I never could get a hold of in my Masters of the Universe Classics days, and that's the Shadow Weaver from Classics, who I believe was a subscriber exclusive. That figure was never ever going to be mine at that time, so this one works perfectly. Not only does it look like that figure in quite a few ways, I actually think it's a pretty big improvement. It's certainly a lot more animation accurate, and I really like the accessories it comes with. I especially like how they integrated the soft goods with it, and it ends up being a really nice looking figure. I also like that she comes with this cool little transparent display stand. So it ends up giving her a really dynamic look on the shelf, plus it has a hinge in it so you can pose it in quite a few cool ways as well. I really do think that this ends up being a great representation of Shadow Weaver, and even though it's held back a little bit by the form that the character takes, as this is all kind of a solid brick down here around the legs, I still think that she works really well for the collection. And with that, we break into the top 50 with SDCC version of Scareglow. So this figure, in my opinion, should have been a lot higher up on the list, but it has a couple of little foibles that kind of keep it from being any higher than it is. I remember it was with great excitement that I ordered this guy, and I was really looking forward to him glowing in the dark. However, much to my unfortunate surprise, only his head glows in the dark. You might be fooled by how bright some of this green looks on his chest and legs, and even on the arms over here with the bones, but none of that glows. The only thing that does is the head. To me, this was really unfortunate because this was supposed to be a con figure, and to me that means that it should be just as good as possible and pull out all the stops. And even though it did come with some cool accessories like parts of the power sword and a really nice cape, has a bendy wire element to it, unfortunately it also has a giant tag, which is a really bad detractor to the overall look. Just for that alone, what should have been a figure that ranked much higher ends up ranking a little bit lower than I hoped it would. And here's something I definitely didn't expect at the time, but at number 41, outdoing the con exclusive version, is the standard version of Revelation Scareglow. This one ended up looking quite a bit cooler to me. I especially liked the regular color on the skull, as well as the yellow bones on the black bodysuit. And I really did like the tones of purple that they used better here. Just so that you can see a side-by-side comparison, yes, the con exclusive Scareglow over here does look more like Scareglow in certain scenes, but to me, the colors here work a little bit better. So if you didn't get the SDCC version, don't feel too bad, because this one does pretty much the same thing, just without the fancy packaging. Of course, it is missing that bendy wire right here in the cape, but that's not something I mind because I don't have to deal with a giant tag. And at number 48, we have Revelation Triclops. One of the coolest things about this figure is, much like Trapjaw from that same Deluxe line, it seems like Mattel had the foresight to know that eventually they would come out with the new Eternia versions of these guys, and that would kind of work more as classic versions of these characters. So they thought that they should go ahead and include their motherboard cult costumes, and that would help them stay unique, I think, in the collection. And sure enough, that's what it's done. Ever since they've come out with the giant motherboard figure, I've been able to keep he and Trapjaw dressed in their cloaks from that cult. So I think that that's certainly a cool way of keeping him unique. And he definitely edges out Trapjaw because he has an entirely alternate head to use for his costume. So I thought that made this one even more unique. I felt like the outfit switch up was a little more ornate as well, since Triclops is kind of the high priest of that group. So I really think that this one looks cool in either mode, and I think he also makes a great classic look as well. So this one's a real winner. But like I said, has been kind of replaced in some ways by that new Eternia version. Next up, at number 47, we have Masters Universe Revelation Teela 2.0. This version of Teela is of course meant to represent all the flashback sequences in the show, as well as that first episode and her more classic appearance. I think this one's quite a bit better than the original Teela that they released, because this one is much more recognizable as classic Teela. Not only that, but it comes with an alternative head with the hair down to simulate some moments from that first episode. But I really do think that this works as a great halfway point between that 2000X Teela design as well as the Filmation one. I suppose more than anything, it looks a whole lot like the Filmation costume and hairstyle with more of that 2000X style face. So I really do think this is one of the better Teela figures that you can still get on the market. I think the only thing is that her face still has that kind of blank expression, and I think it would have been better had she been smiling for this one and would have created a better contrast with that second head. For number 46, it's the New Eternia Battle Armor He-Man. This is one of my favorites from those early New Eternia releases. I think that they did a phenomenal job here. I really love the overall aesthetic for this He-Man. I like the action feature about being able to switch out the plates on the battle armor, and I even like those additional pieces that he comes with, including that extra shoulder pad over here and the thigh armor on the sides. He's pretty much kind of a reversioning of that Barbarian He-Man that we had earlier, but I think that he does enough to set himself apart. I also really enjoy the bearded head sculpt. I think it looks really good. Even if it's not maybe instantly recognizable as He-Man, I still think that it's a really good head sculpt, and I think some of that can depend on what sample you're looking at. Also, something that I foolishly didn't mention in my old review of this is the really cool homage to the Dragon Walker right here with the shield. Definitely one that you should add to your collection if you haven't yet. It's a shame that he ends up being kind of pushed down the list maybe a little further than he ought to be, just because there's been some fairly better He-Men that's released since then, but not many more. At number 45 is Revelation Clamp Champ. Originally, I'd kind of delayed ordering Clamp Champ from Masterverse, because really when I'd seen some of the prototype images, I thought that it seemed kind of like a very basic and unremarkable figure. Good, but unremarkable, just like Fisto. Instead, what I found was actually there's a really good chance that this Clamp Champ is probably the best version of the character that has been released. The sculpting was actually much more in the vein of New Eternia than it was the Revolution and Revelation shows, and it was given kind of more of that texture and detail, especially the head sculpt, which had a lot more lines and things than I was anticipating. I also really liked how they handled the chest armor, and I especially liked the paintwork on it. This was also one of the very first figures in the line to have those drop-down hips, and they work beautifully with this particular figure. The other really impressive thing that takes this guy over the top is the way they handled the actual clamp. Basically, the whole assembly can come apart, and you're able to put the hand over a really strong peg. Because of that, you can then put it back together, and the clamp itself is strong enough to where it really can hold a normal sized figure. Now, really, then the whole limit would be how much the arm can actually hold, and sometimes that's not a lot. But the clamp really does work, and Mattel really did listen to complaints about the Origins clamp not really being able to hold a lot. For all these reasons, I was actually really shocked that Clamp Champ ended up being just as cool as he was, meaning that I think there's a pretty good chance that this may be the de facto Clamp Champ that they release, and is meant to not only act as the cartoon version, but also as a New Eternia version. But who knows, maybe they'll still come out with a New Eternia version eventually. And at number 44, we have Revelation Hero. It's It's possible that you may be slightly surprised that he ended up this high on the list and ended up beating out so many other Revelation figures. But for me, it's not surprising at all because Hero is probably my favorite character in all of Masters of the Universe. I've always thought he had a terrific design, and I love the mystique surrounding the character. He's kind of the main character that never was. This figure does a great job of capturing the look of the character. There's a whole lot here that I like quite a bit better than the Masters of the Universe Classics version. Even if that gold is fairly dull looking, it's still not that bad. And I certainly understand the pinch they were in when trying to make sure that the articulated part would work out well and they wouldn't be stymied by maybe some kind of metallic gold or even some kind of vac metal plating. However, I do think the figure turns out well, and it's definitely one of the better in-hand figures versus initial prototype images. If I had to change anything, it would be to give him a little bit larger head, because I do think he suffers from the pinhead syndrome probably a little bit more than some of the other Revolution and Revelation figures. However, I think they've done so many things right here in terms of sculpt and detail that I would still call this a win any day. However, it would be nice if Hero were smiling. At number 43, we have the deluxe release of Princess of Power Hordak. For this figure, Mattel did a great job of updating that classic cartoon appearance of Hordak. They have definitely left in all the things that makes the Filmation version of the character have his unique identity. Everything from having the arm cannon to that really nice shade of blue. They also did a good job of including some heads here that kept the character very sinister, and I think he comes off really, really well. Of course, this wouldn't be the only version of Hordak that we would get in the line, and he is kind of beaten out slightly by a more detailed Hordak that we will get into later. Still though, I think this one is very classic looking, and he's the perfect counterpart to the other Princess of Power figures that they released in the Masterverse line so far. Yeah, bring on more of the Horde. Alright, and we have officially gotten halfway through our list of figures. Since there are a total of 84, this next figure at number 42 will represent that top half of the figures. That means from here on out, please, you can stop yelling at me from your keyboard about why I hated a certain figure, because these I consider to be in the top half of the line. So all of these, I'll definitely be focusing on the positives, even if I address a few small criticisms. And at number 42, we have New Eternia, Many Faces. I really like what Mattel did with their New Eternia take on Many Faces, because they really gave us a whole lot of options for the faces and the ability to actually take off the helmet, remove the face plates, and add more. I'm really hoping that future figures in line will come with maybe even a few more options for this guy. And of course, it works as good as it ever did. Now, I have the 3 classic versions right here, but it does come with 3 other kind of new revisionist faces that I really like as well. He also comes with a cool carrying case for said extra faces. The one thing I'm not so keen on is how they have this colored orange up here as well. I think this would have looked much better with that purple or blue on these parts. Other than that, I thought that he was a really cool figure, and I really enjoy this version of Many Faces. At number 41, we have a very surprising character that actually got released in Masterverse, and that's Gwildor. But it's not Gwildor from the 87 movie necessarily. It is Gwildor from Masters of the Universe Revolution. This was, of course, part of the 2-pack with Orko, and I think he makes the translation very nicely to the Masterverse line. It does a good job of capturing both the movie, where Billy Barty played the character, and also the animation, which they did a beautiful job of homaging the events of that film, canonizing them. So I really do appreciate that. And this figure is a nice little representation of that. And earlier I had alluded to this one at number 43. It's the Masters of the Universe Revolution Hordak. This is one of the most recent figures that is on this list, and as such, he's treated to all of the modern amenities of Masterverse figures, such as the drop-down hips, as well as expanded accuracy in sculpt and paintwork. Of course, this figure does represent Hordak as portrayed by the amazing Keith David from Masters of the Universe Revolution, where he did sport one of my favorite designs for the character that we have ever seen. Particularly impressive for this one is just the kind of bulkiness of the armor and his intimidating presence. I especially like all the trouble they went to capture his really awesome and scary visage right there on that head sculpt. he also looks kind of aristocratic and a little bit proud, so I think that it works out really, really well. I think that one of the areas that maybe he's held back just a little is on the kind of skirt piece right here. Much like the Sorceress Tila we were talking about earlier, there's definitely some limitations there. So when you go to do the splits, maybe it can't go as crazy as you might hope, but at least when he kicks out, thanks to those drop down hips, there's not really any kind of problem. So even though you might have to get a little creative with the way that you pose this guy, I still say that he is one of the better releases from the animation figures in the line. And the fight between Skeletor and Hordak was totally awesome in Revolution. So thankfully we now have the ability to reenact that battle and get some awesome poses between these two. At number 39 is a figure that really doesn't get the amount of love that it truly does deserve. And that's number 39 CGI Netflix He-Man figure. It is pretty cool what Mattel was able to do with this guy. It's almost like they took the CGI model itself, which they very well could have, and turned it into an action figure. I think this looks absolutely great. After getting several versions of this guy in the more kid-aimed line, it was awesome to see something so exact to those wild proportions from the CGI model. Not only that, but it's not like he's a statue or anything. He actually has pretty decent posability. And especially at the torso here, you can do all sorts of different movements, and with the legs, he's just as articulated as any other figure in the line, even with double jointed knees. And believe it or not, he is pretty well able to stand. The only thing that I would say is kind of an issue with this guy is the cuts here on these hinges aren't deep enough to allow the arms to get really close to the sides. So that's the one big articulation caveat there. Other than that, I think this guy is pretty brilliant looking, and especially if you dig that style from the CGI show. If you don't, then clearly this one's not for you. But for me, this one does everything it's supposed to, and is one of the most unique looking figures in the entire line. Number 38 is Revelation Jason Mewes. Stinkor. This is definitely one of the Revelation figures that is higher on the list. And after laying eyes on the guy, you can pretty obviously tell why. This one just turns out perfectly. All the colors really pop well together. They've done an excellent kind of wash on the furry underwear. I love how the head sculpt looks, and he does come with two of them, so there is an unmasked one as well. I do like him with a mask. I think it gives him a little something extra there. And I just love all the black and white paint apps as well. This guy is just one of the better looking Revelation figures. Not only does he work well as a Revelation character, but I really do think that you could get away with just using this as your standard Stinkor for a new Eternia display. So I really do think this one is one of the better Revelation figures. At number 37 is Masters of the Universe Revolution Sorceress Tila. Of course, in the series, this transformation delighted me and I think a whole lot of other fans, because it was a culmination of Tila really accepting her destiny and powering up to that next level. Not only that, but it is an absolutely fantastic design. I think that it really melds together the two worlds of the sorceress and the high adventure that Tila always engages in, and kind of combines them into one really visually pleasing motif. I especially like what they've been able to do with the head sculpt. I do think the serious facial expression is very appropriate here because she is in some very intense battles using this form. I just love all the different paint hits, and especially how the gold turned out on this one. So I think there's a lot to really love. I especially like how the cape looks back here. They did some cool printing and things to make sure that that turned out as accurate and as nice to the show as it possibly could. The one thing maybe that I'm not so fond of is how much that skirt inhibits some of the articulation, especially because at this point in the line, since this is one of the most recent releases, they started to do the drop down hips. Now that does negate some of this problem because you can drop the leg down and still get some decent kicks, but there definitely is some limitations here still. Other than that, I think this one is one of the very best animation figures that you can get. At number 36, we have one of the better female figures in the line, and that is the Princess of Power Frosta. I love how it utilizes that same basic body type that we had from Catra and of course She-Ra, who will be later on in the list. Of course, I think the main strength with this figure is the absolutely stunning head sculpt. They've done an incredible job of capturing the Filmation animation model, and I think that they've really done justice to that character. The Filmation artists always did an incredible job of drawing beautiful women, so I think that this figure does really capture the beauty of the character Frost is definitely a big favorite for fans of Princess of Power and even people who maybe aren't as into Princess of Power like me. So I think it's awesome that they actually got her into the line and managed to outclass the Masters of the Universe Classics version. At number 35, we have Masters of the Universe Revelation, Evil Lyn 2.0. I really love this brand new design for Evil Lyn that came about in the second half of the series. It's such a neat what if regarding what would actually happen if Evil Lyn became the sorceress. And instead of the evil motif, we have a bat motif. And with that, a really cool outfit as well. I think that they've done a great job capturing the look from the show, and I really like the soft goods cape. They use that same elastic band method that I talked about earlier, but here it's even less noticeable because the bands are black on black plastic. So I think that that works out really well. The only criticism I would have of the figure is that maybe they were a little too ambitious with using paint to capture some of the details, particularly in using flesh tone paint down here and not flesh tone plastic, which ends up maybe having a few scuffs and things, but it's truly not enough to detract from the awesomeness of this figure and this design in particular. So I think this one turns out great. At number 34 is Netflix CGI Skeletor. Once again, just like He-Man, his counterpart figure in this line, I do feel like this one is vastly underappreciated. You're looking at pretty much an animation perfect representation of this character in plastic. It's really impressive to see those wild, exaggerated proportions in this massive hulking figure. Even though both He-Man and Skeletor aren't necessarily the tallest figures in the line, they are so massive in terms of width that it's incredible that the thickness of these figures actually got crammed into a Masterverse box. Everything from Skeletor's skeleton hand to the awesome face sculpt, all the way to those giant bulky proportions and a real metal chain down here that's attached to the Havoc staff. I think that this is one of the very best Masterverse figures that you can get. The only negatives I would have is that he does have a little bit of a hard time standing sometimes, since the figure is so top heavy. I mean, I've not had any trouble here while I've shown it to you, but it's especially when you start putting accessories out, it kind of unbalances the figure a little. And I think it would be nice if they had added a little black wash in the teeth, just so that you could see those sculptural details even better. And a more recent release at number 33, it's Princess of Power Grizzlor. Those who are unfamiliar with the old Filmation She-Ra series may not necessarily recognize this right off the bat as a good representation of Grizzlor, but that's because this is very much based on that cartoon and less so on the classic figure. Even though this does do a good job of capturing the main aesthetic points that you think of when you imagine Grizzlor, such as the actual fur and the harness, I think that this is definitely more based on the cartoon and does a great job of taking that design and kind of gridding it up a little bit, particularly for the head sculpt, which looks nothing short of absolutely devious. This thing is awesome looking. I like all the subtle paint work on the fur, how there's some dry brushing, and I really even like the hand sculpts. I think those look cool as well. This guy is just a really large, menacing figure, and it's pretty incredible to me that he came in as just a basic one and not a deluxe. So I think this is some of the best sculpting and paintwork combination that we've seen in the line so far. At number 32, it's the Masters of the Universe Revolution Orko. Was a figure that I delayed ordering for quite a while. I assumed that he was probably just a simple rework of that original Orko from the 2-pack with Savage He-Man. But actually, I was wrong. Not only was this new Orko a completely new sculpt, but there was a couple of other things that really impressed me as well. One of the main ones that I noticed was not only just the accuracy of the sculpt, but just the love I have for this new design for Orko. It seems that he's just a lot more traditional looking now that he has full sleeves and doesn't have the weird bare arms. So that makes a big difference. The other thing is he comes with kind of a scarf that actually goes back and loops around this giant energy effect that he gets. And I love this effect because you can adjust it. It's pretty much a sphere of energy made out of 2 pieces. Also, the base stand that he's on is extremely impressive, especially because it's not only very transparent where you wouldn't be able to notice it too much in a display, but it has a clip on the back that holds that energy sphere effect in place. Combine that with the expanded articulation on the arms, the cool pearlescent effect on all the blue energy, as well as the hinges that are on the elbows and the rotations. And I have to say, this has to be the best Orko in this scale that any company has released. Yes, I know he does have the alternative color scheme and everything that is reflective of the cartoon, so he may not look quite as traditional as a whole lot of fans would like, but that's a great design in the show. And this figure is by far the most playable and interesting Orko that anybody has ever came out with, in my opinion, and it looks great to boot with an awesome energy effect. At number 31, it's Revolution Keldor. If you've not watched Masters of the Universe Revolution, I certainly won't get into all of the intricacies about this character, but needless to say, this character leaves a really strong impression. He is portrayed by William Shatner, and it's definitely one of the strongest performances in the entire series. I absolutely love what they did with the character, and I really love what they did with the design. You can, of course, take that crown piece and fit it right over his head here. And if you want to, you can crown him the King of Eternia. So I just really love everything about the sculpt and everything about the character it represents. Not only that, but they actually include another head sculpt with him, so you can capture a whole other kind of vibe with the character. I really like the neutral one here, and I really love the soft goods cloak. I like this really royal blue, and I especially like the soft goods fur right around the neck. It's very kingly looking, and it's all held on with those elastic bands, which you would never even really see down there. It's definitely one of the more regal figures that they've done in the line, and it gives me a lot of hope for their ability to do maybe a really nice King Randor figure so that we can capture the look of Keldor's half-brother. At number 30, we have New Eternia Clawful. Although I'm usually not a really big fan of Clawful in any form in Masters of the Universe, this one really did capture my attention. It addressed a lot of my concerns about Clawful. Usually I think he just looks kind of bumbling and silly, but this one really does a lot to make him look absolutely horrifying, with the kind of whited out eyes and the really nice paint work and the awesome accessories. This guy is absolutely killer. He's also one of the New Eternia figures where I actually enjoy having those extra accessories on him. You can completely remove this harness if you want to make him more like classic Clawful, but why would you when it looks this cool? That includes his awesome backpack here with these big kind of metallic blue claws coming out of the back to make him even more crab-like. Not only that, but the giant pincher is even articulated, and it's strong enough to where you could at least get the clamps around a character. I'm not sure if you could hold them up, but I think he looks absolutely terrific. Definitely an awesome reinvention, and it took a character that usually I'm not too excited to own and made me pretty thrilled. And heading off the beginning of the 20s in our list, it's number 29, Movie Evil Lyn. Here's a figure that I definitely didn't think that we would ever get in any form from Mattel after the dissolution of the Super 7 agreement to continue classics. At that point, I figured that there was absolutely no hope to get any more of the 1987 movie characters, but I'm very glad that I was wrong. Thankfully, this is a terrific version of what we see in the film. Although it's not exactly accurate in terms of color to the costume that we see on screen, this does a good job of almost getting there. Particularly the one that we see on screen is very shiny in this section and almost gold on that breastplate. This one may not exactly mimic that, but they certainly do a good job of having kind of a gold tinted silvery plastic, and I think it's plenty close enough. I also love all the intricate details on the bodysuit where you see all those little extra designs. Maybe most impressive of all is that they've done an incredible job getting the head sculpt right and the likeness right, along with that very intricate crown. If you turn the figure to the back, you can see the soft goods cloak and how the detail continues there as well. Overall, it's very hard to complain about this because I think that they've done such a spectacular job in every respect. It's a real shame that we can look at this figure and see what could have been with that Dolph Lundgren He-Man. Here they clearly secured the likeness rights, but with the Dolph Lundgren He-Man, not so much. I really do love what Mattel was able to do here, and it's definitely one of their best achievements in terms of likeness. And bizarrely enough, at number 28, we have a character who is played by the same actress as the 1987 movie Evil Lynn, and that's Motherboard. This, as you can see, is an absolutely gigantic figure, and it was offered as an exclusive on Mattel Creations. But the cool thing about this is it really doesn't sacrifice much in the way of articulation for it to be as gigantic as it is. The figure stands at right around 10 inches tall or so and has these awesome articulated wings, and I actually thought that it would be one that I could probably skip and be okay with. However, I did wait it out, and I got this on a big sale on Mattel Creations for nearly half off. So with that kind of discount on the table, it made this figure even more worth it. However, even if I had paid full price, I think I would have been very satisfied with what I had gotten. Not only do you get the figure you see in front of you with the giant wingspan, but the box actually unfolds into kind of a diorama piece that actually allows the base stand to set into a recess on the front and mimics that backdrop of her hideout at Snake Mountain. So this is definitely a really impressive figure. And at number 27, we have New Adventures He-Man. This Target exclusive was loaded with accessories, including an entirely alternate look for He-Man simulating that original 1989 figure. I really have always loved this look for He-Man because of how wild and out there it really is. And this does an even better job than the Masters of the Universe Classics figure did of representing the proportions and the armor of that old figure. Not only that, but once you take the helmet off, you can see that with the head sculpt, they have modeled it more after the jet lag animation version of the character. And so at least that's one little nod to that version. He also comes with the alternate harness that you can put on the chest that also helps him match up to what He-Man looked like under the armor in that initial toy line. I especially enjoy his sword that he comes with, which is also toy accurate. And that translucent shield is pretty awesome as well. If you're a big fan of that old line, I think this does a great job of capturing that, and I have very little to complain about with this guy. And flying onto the scene at number 26 is New Eternia Buzz-Off. So this one was an unexpected hit for me when I got it, especially because I was kind of disenchanted with Buzz-Off since I had seen so many of them from the overshipped wave of Masters of the Universe Origins. This manages to represent kind of a new take on Buzz-Off while still remaining pretty true to the classic version. As you can see, he's still got his big wings and they're transparent and look great with all those little details in them, but he also has a helmet that is transparent as well. And with the cool paint effect going on the eyes with some of that kind of metallic oil look almost, I think that it looks really nice. I especially like their addition of this chest harness and the thigh armor right there on the sides. That added to the other classic details on the figure, and you have something that looks classic while also kind of having a new vibe to it as well. What's cool is you can take the helmet off just like you could in other versions, and you have a head sculpt underneath. You can also take this harness off if you would like it to look a little more classic. So there's lots of good options here, and I love the ability to pose the wings around on the back as well. This one will definitely stand out in your display of Masterverse figures. And now time for our top 25 Masterverse figures. At number 25, we have the Deluxe Mattel Creations exclusive Vicron figure. So this is from the New Eternia subset, but if any of you all are aware of Vicron, it's a concept that was created during Masters of the Universe Classics to encompass all of the prototype figures that the designers at Mattel cooked up and kit bashed for the Mattel brass to choose what direction that they wanted their new toy line for boys to go in. This figure has the ability to change into 3 different modes. You can see here that in his mode as just regular old barbarian Vicron, it's meant to look like that old prototype figure that the guys at Mattel had mocked up all those years ago. There's also kind of a Space Ace look where it's more like Boba Fett, and there's definitely been a lot of comparisons to that over the years, but this version kind of does more of its own thing. And there's also kind of a military look as well. I think it was called Tank Top, possibly. But either way, this is such a versatile figure, and I've always thought it was a really good bargain. It's always shocked me that this thing is still available on Mattel Creations. So maybe the next time they have a big sale, or just at regular price, I think that you would really enjoy this guy, and he works as a great part of your collection. I mean, let's be real, that's a better Conan head sculpt than most companies trying to do a Conan head sculpt achieves, so. And at number 24, we may have a fairly divisive choice to be this high on the list, but I truly believe that the Masters Universe Revelation Prince Adam more than earns his place this high up on the list. I think that certainly people who have watched my older lists about Masters of the Universe Origins can always see my distaste for when they do kind of a lazier Prince Adam figure, where it's just the He-Man head and, you know, and he's all bulked out. Well, this is certainly the opposite of that, where they've done a great job of capturing that incredible animation model that they worked with in the Masters Universe Revelation and Revolution shows, and they've translated it perfectly to plastic. Out of all of the cartoon figures that I've covered here, this may be the one that is perhaps the best translation, actually. There's two head sculpts. There's the standard one, and there's this awesome smiling and laughing one, which is less of a joke than it is just a kind of jubilant expression of the character that you see in the show. Not only that, but you can see the incredible shading that's gone on the hair. It's one of their most successful attempts at doing kind of that animated blonde look that I've ever seen. This Prince Adam figure is way more than just a silly joke about him wearing pink and purple or something like that, but it embodies the feel of the character. So I'm surprised I didn't put him even higher on the list. He comes with a sparkly power sword. Come on. I said, hey, what's going on? There, you happy? At number 23 is New Eternia Whiplash. This is definitely the figure that turned a Whiplash skeptic like me into a Whiplash believer. I've never really particularly cared for the Whiplash design. I've always kind of seen it as just kind of an ugly monster, but not in the way that you want a monster to be ugly. But this one, yeah, this one knocked my socks off. Not only did it have all the extra pieces so that you could kind of turn them into more of that concept version with the purple armor, which also looks awesome, but it did such a great job of conveying the actual classic base version of Whiplash, whether it's the awesome face paint that they've done, or the extra dark wash that they put on the scales here, or even the bendy wire tail that he includes. I think that this guy does everything right and definitely is the best version of Whiplash that you can possibly buy. At number 22 is a fairly recent figure, and it's New Eternia Cyclone. When it comes to the New Eternia designs that Mattel has been cranking out, Cyclone is definitely kind of the best case scenario of what those designs could be. What I mean is they take all of the best elements of that original figure and they add just a few little extra touches to make it something special and unique, and it all blends together into something that looks really, really nice. And definitely Cyclone is that figure. Not only does the gold plastic they use actually work and looks really nice as gold, actually I wish that the hero armor had this style of gold, but they also do some other really cool things, like the whole chest radar deal. It's actually translucent and you can see inside to multiple layers that Mattel has put in to simulate the old look of the lenticular piece on the toy. They've also added some incredible little bits of detail to the face that makes him look more robotic. Not only that, but they even included an entire face shield that you can put on the figure, I guess for when he's in space or in some kind of battle mode. He also includes some effects parts on the back, but you can mount it to this shield that he comes with, which works to simulate the red rings that we've seen in more modern versions of the character. I could go on and on about all the awesome details on this guy, but it's one that you just need to pick up and experience for yourself. And at number 21, just barely missing the top 20, it's New Eternia Faker. Here's another great example of what can go right with one of the New Eternia redesigns. They've basically taken everything that you might love about the original Faker and brought it into that modern New Eternia kind of look. And as well as the perfect shade of blue and a terrific new He-Man head sculpt, which they would later use for the Thunder Punch version, which we'll get to. Believe it or not, that chest decal from the old figure is actually sculpted fully and painted here. That's awesome. I really appreciate all of the kind of techie parts that are on the fake power sword that he has, almost like they've tried to create a counterfeit one that would still work the same way. You can also see that he includes a shield here that was originally included with another figure, but was clearly meant for Faker. I really love how this guy turned out, and he's definitely a great example of what the New Eternia line can do. And starting out our top 20 at number 20, it's Dark Evil Lyn. Now, this is an incredible deluxe style figure that was only available on Mattel Creations. This large scale figure is entirely intimidating and definitely shows the horror of what would happen if Evil Lyn got a hold of the power. This is a perfect recreation of that final battle from the show where we saw Evil Lyn all powered up and muscled up in her new form. Especially impressive is how on the inside of her cape she actually has an entire star field, which is accurate to how it was portrayed in the show. Not only that, but this is all an entirely original and new sculpt, which will probably only be used this one time to capture Evil Lyn all bulked up. She even has the big gold H logo. Truly, this is an impressive piece of figural art. I think it was an incredible achievement and a perfect representation of pretty much what you would call the final boss in Masters of the Universe Revelation. I love this figure. And at number 19 is Masters of the Universe Deluxe King Grayskull from Masters of the Universe Revelation and Revolution as well. You know, I've always been a huge fan of King Grayskull as a concept, and I thought that it was awesome that Masters of the Universe Revelation kind of made him a little more unique instead of just being pretty much a He-Man clone with long hair that was a little bit bigger. Taking that awesome design that they came up with for King Grayskull and turning it into plastic form, I think it is truly an impressive accomplishment. I love the cape that they came up with that has the integrated posing wire, as well as the awesome soft goods fur right up there that really does make the figure feel very, very premium. A lot of these figures that I've been discussing have been Target exclusives, and if it wasn't for their partnership with Mattel with Masterverse, we wouldn't have gotten a whole lot of the very best figures in the line. So that's something that I appreciate very much, and it certainly worked in our favor here, as this King Grayskull figure is one of the very best that the line has to offer. Now, give me a Bionatops for him to ride, please. At number 18, we have 40th Anniversary He-Man. I was crazy over the idea of Mattel doing this. Basically, what they did was they just took the original He-Man and made him 7-inch action figure, and I really think that the results were quite good. Sure, the chest may be slightly too big, and maybe the tones on the face are just slightly too light to match the neck, but overall, I do think that this was a really great accomplishment. Instantly recognizable as one of the most famous boys action figures ever made, and infinitely posable as well, I really think that this was Mattel going in the right direction, and I would love to see them return to doing more figures in that 40th anniversary style, although He-Man and Skeletor are the only ones so far. And at number 17, it is pretty much the same figure, only a little bit better. That's right, it's the San Diego Comic-Con version of the 40th anniversary He-Man. So what makes this one slightly better is that he comes with some die-cast accessories. So we have a die-cast power sword, shield, and axe, as well as a more silvery chest harness, and we even have some flocking on the boots and the furry underwear. The one thing that I will say about this particular version is maybe it's even more obvious here that maybe the face is a little too light to match that neck, but honestly it's a small quibble given that this has such a great shelf presence, especially with those metal weapons. Of course, I'm not really sure it would be worth seeking this one out individually over the other. I think the other retail release is just fine, but I will say that this was slightly more premium, so that's why it edged out the original version just a little. And since that SDCC exclusive was a 2-pack, it came with the, so far, only way to own 40th anniversary Skeletor. Now, I will say that I think that this figure is awesome, and it's sort of a crime against the fandom that this was the only way that you could get that Skeletor, and still is. It's such a shame because this one really did bring together some of the very best elements that we'd seen of the classic Skeletor. You even have a jaw that can open and close, and I thought that was just such a cool feature, meaning that you can get him to be a little more expressive in your posing. Not only that, but I really like how they did the fade between the yellow and the green on the face, which is something that sometimes falls by the wayside. He does have some die cast up here with this shiny purple part of the skull of the Havoc staff, and he does include this nice sword as well. Other than that, everything is exactly as you would expect for Skeletor from that classic figure, and it's such a shame that this was the only way that Mattel has made it available so far. And at number 15, it's New Eternia Stratos. Stratos here is one of the very most classic looking New Eternia figures that you can get. The only real difference between he and his original classic counterpart is that this one has an optional breathing mask that you can put on him for, I guess, when he gets into the stratosphere. Sorry, I'll stop. No, seriously, this is an awesome figure, and I love how it captures Stratos. It does remind me a little bit, sort of some of that 2000X aesthetic, and I love how they did the wings as well on the arms there, including a little jetpack on the back. So I really do believe that this is probably the best Stratos figure that we've ever gotten in any line so far. Looks awesome. At number 14, we have New Eternia Man-at-Arms. This is one of the best Man-at-Arms figures that you can get on the market today. Not only does he include some really nice classic looking accessories, as well as some really nice armor that even has kind of a dark wash on it to simulate maybe that it's been through some battles, but it also includes not only one, but two different head sculpts for Man-at-Arms. It comes with his mustachioed version here, as well as a clean-shaven version to help simulate that original figure. I also like that instead of the furry underwear, he has kind of leather pieces there, which I think looks pretty classy. Even the back of his armor has some really cool details, as well as some storage for his mace. And I especially like the crossed swords in gold on the shoulder pad. If you're looking for an absolutely classic version of Man-at-Arms, then you can't go wrong by just grabbing this one. It even outdoes a whole lot of elements of the old classics versions that we used to get from Mattel. At number 13, we have a fairly recent addition, and that's... oh, never mind. It was Mekaneck. That's right, we have the New Eternia Mekaneck figure. This is a completely awesome new version of the classic character. Well, we've zoomed out a little bit. You can see just how epic all of those sections on the neck really is. It's incredible to see them all connected this way, and it's a sight to behold and a huge display of Masterverse figures to see him peeking out from the back. This guy is just impressive in every single metric. Not only does he work as a great classic version of the character, I would say he is fairly easily the best version of Mekaneck that we've ever gotten in any line. Plus, look at that shield. That's dynamite. At slot number 12 is New Adventures Skeletor. To me, this is the absolutely perfect representation of Skeletor from New Adventures of He-Man. Definitely beating out the He-Man figure that they did. This Target exclusive incorporates all of the different details that I've always wanted to see in this guy. You know, the Masters of the Universe Classics figure is always one that I really like, but I think everyone could agree that the big chest piece that they put over the already bulky Masters of the Universe Classics frame caused him to look so big that it couldn't possibly look anywhere near as accurate to the original 1989 figure as it really needed to. This one, on the other hand, has pretty much the perfect proportions. I especially like that even the helmet up here is totally removable, and such that you can actually see the burnt out portions of Skeletor's head that we actually spied in the mini comic that came with the figures. And it's completely awesome that he comes with his brand new Havoc staff. And it seems like a great representation of the roleplay item too that kids could get during this time. This one is a real winner, and if you have any interest in that old New Adventures aesthetic, this is definitely one for you. Again, a great example of why that Target partnership with Mattel has been absolutely instrumental in getting us some of the very best Masterverse figures. And at number 11, it's New Eternia Deluxe Beastman. This hulking brute of a figure is probably the most impressive Beastman figure that has ever been created by the people at Mattel. Where to start? There's so many incredible things going on with the sculpt. Just the actual mass of the figure is so impressive. I couldn't imagine any Masters of the Universe fan being without this guy in their collection. Definitely the best version of the character that has been released in regular 7-inch scale form so far. It goes a long way in beating out the old classics version, and even has an entirely different form that it comes with the extra costume pieces to achieve, being able to turn into a facsimile of Mark Taylor's old original design for Beastman. This guy has it going on in every single category, and with the only slight drawback being a little bit of a color mismatch on the chest compared to the arms, which can easily be fixed. Still, this guy is completely awesome, and I highly suggest him. And here we are down to the top 10 Masterverse figures so far. Now, number 10 may come as a surprise to many folks watching the video, and this will be the only Revelation branded figure that made it to the top 10. And that's the Deluxe Man-at-Arms 2.0. Anybody who watched the series knows that later on in the show, Man-at-Arms comes out of retirement and gets some of his old armor and modified pieces and puts it over his civilian clothes. This figure is an incredible representation of this. Not only does he come with a couple of different head sculpts so that you can have kind of the civilian Duncan once you take the armor off, but you can add all this armor and his cape and cloak and everything, and you can create this awesome out of retirement Man-at-Arms. Truly, this is so impressive with all the intricate sculpting, the way that the soft goods work in conjunction with the other pieces. I personally like stuffing the cape under the armor right there. I think that kind of helps control it and makes it look even cooler. And I really like this awesome cannon that can be mounted into the hand right there. There's just so many things going on with the figure that makes it a real standout, and I absolutely love using this in conjunction with my other figures in my animation display. Truly, this is an unmissable figure from that Revelation line, and is a rare case of one of the animation versions beating out the new Eternia versions that have been offered of the character so far. Number 9 might be another surprising pick for a lot of you, but I am a huge fan of the 1987 He-Man movie, and here it is, 1987 movie Skeletor. This Deluxe figure actually accomplishes the feat of easily beating out the Super 7 version of the same character. Even though some may look at the chest armor and think that it's maybe a little inaccurate, the truth is that if you look up images of the costume, you can actually see that the breastplate did have kind of a red and purple tinge to it a little bit, but once it was put on film and it was color graded, a lot of that went away and it ended up looking pretty much black. This figure does bring that back a little, and even though it might be a little off-putting for some, it really does look incredible. Especially impressive is the Frank Langella likeness. I'm not sure if they actually had likeness rights to Langella or not, but because his face was mostly obscured by a mask, they were pretty much able to do a one-to-one version and probably didn't have to worry about likeness rights. Not only that, but they've done an incredible job of capturing the ornate Havoc staff from the movie, as well as Skeletor's sword, which I'm not sure he ever used in the movie. If you look on the back, he does have a soft goods cape, and they went as far as to include things that most people wouldn't even notice, like the little medallion on the back of Skeletor's cloak, as well as all these little plates that are all over Skeletor's kilt that he wears. This is incredibly impressive, all the extra little details and added things that they've done. They've even gotten all the little plates on his like sash piece or scarf piece correct. This is really incredible, intricate sculpting work, and I highly suggest that everybody gets a hold of one of these. And remember, don't leave them lonely. Make sure you get that evil Lyn to go with them. And at number 8, we have the only female figure and the only Princess of Power figure on the top 10, and that's Princess of Power Deluxe She-Ra. Quite simply, it is by far the best She-Ra figure that you can get in this scale. If you compare her to all of the attempts that Mattel made during the Classics era, this is a very clear-cut case, not even close. This is the much better option. Not only does she have the soft goods cape, which is always a win, but the head sculpt is completely gorgeous. They have captured She-Ra in a way that the old guard were never actually able to do. Not only that, but they've given us a very Filmation accurate costume that looks really wonderful. But they also went the extra mile and actually have some switchable pieces that can make her more accurate to the Netflix cartoon that they did for She-Ra, and even a masked head that's meant to reflect the toy in some ways. So there's definitely some options with this figure. The only thing that I would say is that there's a slightly different shade of white down here versus on the breastplate, which can be a little off-putting. Other than that, this is the absolute perfect She-Ra figure and is definitely one that you don't want to miss. And at lucky number 7 is New Eternia Thunder Punch He-Man. So in my opinion, this is the very best that the new Eternia line has to offer in terms of a He-Man figure. I think that this one is really incredible, and I definitely don't agree with the criticisms that the head sculpt has been receiving in a whole lot of the reviews that I've looked at. To me, this thing is pretty much a perfect looking classic He-Man, and I especially love what they've done with the Thunder Punch motif. They have the awesome effects pieces, and they also have a great system for the sword and the shield to interact with each other. They even have some removable extra braces that you can put on the arms, which I have on one of them right now. Although they did do a little bit to redesign the crest for the Thunder Punch emblem, I do think that it's a good look. And I especially like that on the backpack back here, you can twist it and you can get those special cap noises that we used to get. To me, this is just an absolutely beautiful figure, and it's one that shouldn't be left out of your collection. At number 6 is New Eternia Deluxe Ram Man. Now, this is a very impressive figure, and I definitely think that it easily takes the crown of the very best Ram Man that Mattel has ever done. Not only do we have this awesome silver tone that's been used for his armor, but we also get something that is really interesting, and that's these rubberized pants that are over the legs. Now, you do have the ability to pretty much fully articulate the legs, but that rubber is kind of acting as sort of a pair of pants over them, and it doesn't inhibit it quite as much as you would think it would, but we just hope that that material will continue to last into the future. As it stands, just sculpturally, this is an incredible representation of Ram Man, and he even includes all sorts of alternate pieces so that you can get more of a concept art look for the character. With all this being considered, they've also found the perfect balance between kind of the more dopey and the more stoic looks for Ram Man's head sculpt. So you end up with something that can kind of work as either one. This is a very impressive figure, and I'm really glad to have it in my collection. Alright, hold on to your hats, because now it's time for the top 5 Masterverse figures. At number 5, we have the Deluxe Mattel Creations exclusive Snout Spout. This is a very impressive figure. I was even more impressed with this guy in hand than I thought I would be. Not only is he absolutely huge, but it's definitely the most impressive version of Snout Spout that we've gotten so far. He has an extremely posable snout, which is very cool. Even the ears are able to be hinged back and forth. He comes on an extremely posable, extra large sized potty. I love all of the little subtle paint effects going on. He has optional shoulder pads and all sorts of little hoses and things that hook up to the belt, a pressure gauge that you can pose around. You name it, this guy probably has it. If you turn him around on the back, you can see this really awesome backpack that keeps up with the different water levels. He even has light piping in the helmet there to make the eyes look like they're glowing. We've definitely come a long way since that deteriorating rubber snout that we had in Masters of the Universe Classics, and this is an awesome kind of revision of that character in a new Eternia style. So I definitely suggest you get a hold of this guy. And at number 4, we have New Eternia Triclops. So you can see here that I have a lot of his optional pieces on, including the sash that he had in his first mini-comics appearance. And I absolutely love this version of the character. I think that it pretty much has to be the definitive version that I have seen Mattel do so far. He's extremely detailed, and I love the kind of feel that they have going for the character. Whether it's the sword, or the awesome kind of metallic shade of green they have going, or the painted wraps on the boots. There's so many areas where this guy excels. I especially like the almost little like scales on the furry underwear down there. It's all just so cool looking. And for a character that's had some excellent action figures over the years, I do think this is the very best Triclops that you can get. And at number 3, we have New Eternia Trapjaw. So this Trapjaw is definitely an incredible specimen. Looking more like a statue than an action figure, this takes the very best elements of the character and melds it into something that is completely awesome looking. He of course does a lot of the things that we expect a Trapjaw figure to do, including having the switchable weapons and things for the arms, but you can see that the posability for the arm is really extreme because you can actually bring it in and out like in a butterfly joint. And I love how it's kind of exaggerated and kind of bigger than you would normally expect it to be. They've also added some little bits of tech and things here and there to make him a little more intimidating. I especially like how it actually has weapon storage on the side for like this hook and some of the other extra accessories that he comes with. You can even switch out his jaw piece to make it larger and more extreme if you so desire. Not only that, but as per usual, he does have the ability to open his mouth, and instead of the goofy kind of tiny little pupils that we see in a lot of trap jaw figures, this one looks very competent and really, really scary. So I definitely think that this is a big improvement over the original Classics version and is by far the best trap jaw that you can buy today. And at number 2, we have Masters of the Universe Revolution Battle Armor He-Man. So I definitely want to put it out there right away that if you're looking at this and saying, oh, what is it about this one that looks a little bit better than mine? It's a quick fix that you can do to kind of solve why he has the gigantic chin when you first get him in hand. But it only takes about a minute and he'll be left with a He-Man figure with a perfectly scaled face. So definitely check out my video that I posted about doing that. Once you do that very simple step, you've got an incredible He-Man figure, by far the best one that they've ever done. It took me a while to kind of weigh out between Thunder Punch He-Man and this one, which one I felt was the very best. But when you have a He-Man figure that's this classic looking and that has so much going for it and is a perfect rendition of the animation model, then this is definitely the one. Not only do you get an incredible He-Man figure with this awesome rendition of the vest that actually has little sections sculpted into it, and I love the kind of brass gold and things that are all over the armor pieces, but you also get the actual battle armor and axe. Now, I put it here on a spare Masters of the Universe Revelation body, and I use the movie He-Man extra head that he came with just to show you so that you can see that if you have an extra body like that, you can just use the cool battle armor pieces. You can also switch out the H right there for the battle damage version, so that's pretty cool as well. And full disclosure, I am using an extra power sword that came with Prince Adam, I believe, back there. All of this combined with the extra bulky chest piece that they developed, and they've now started using with He-Man figures, keeps him from looking like the string bean that we had back in that first wave figure. And if you're still not convinced why this figure deserves to be in that number 2 spot, well, here he is compared to that initial 1.0 Masters of the Universe Revelation figure. You can see that they've come such a long way that this evolution of He-Man that the line initially promised has finally been fulfilled within, well, the actual line. So it's an incredible accomplishment and a He-Man figure that no one should be without. And that leaves our number 1 Masterverse figure. You probably figured it out by now, but it's Masters of the Universe MOTU. So that leaves our final number 1 figure, and you probably figured it out by now. And that's Andre the Giant. And that leaves our final number 1 Masters of the Universe Masterverse figure. And for my money, the very best that you can possibly get. And that is the truly incredible Masterverse New Eternia 2 Bad. This figure absolutely blew me away. And you can go back and watch my initial review of this guy to see just how impressive he truly was and still is to this day. Not only is this figure absolutely gigantic, but the sculptural presence that it has is absolutely unbeatable through the entire line. We're talking about a figure that easily outdoes any other version of 2 Bad that Mattel, or any other company for that matter, has ever released. The excellence of this figure almost dampens my enthusiasm a little bit for the upcoming San Diego Comic-Con exclusive from their Filmation Cartoon Collection series version of the character, because to me this is as good as it gets. The amount of sculpting and the attention to detail that they put into every aspect of this figure is truly a sight to behold. It's even more shocking when I look at places like Amazon nowadays and see that this figure can be had for around the $20 mark. We're talking about a figure that easily surpasses even most Masters of the Universe Classics figures. It's truly an example of what can be done by Mattel, even if it isn't always what is done. I could talk about accessories and some of the other things that the figure features, like this awesome shield here, or maybe the awesome axe or the club or this blaster or the optional belt piece, but truly It's really an experience that you have to have for yourself, with incredible articulation, a huge scale, as you can see, dwarfs He-Man back here, and the most incredible sculpting and extra mile paintwork that you could possibly hope for. This guy is the absolute king of Masterverse. Whew, wow. All 84 figures have now been ranked, and now all that's left is for you to do your part. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought about this ranking video. I'd love to hear about all your agreements, your disagreements, anything you want to tell me down below about the Masterverse line. Now, for me, I really do feel like Masterverse is kind of the unsung hero of MOTU these days. I feel like with all of us kind of focusing so much on Origins, that a lot of folks really do fail to see the true excellence of the Masterverse line. It's something that I think a lot of fans probably haven't checked out too thoroughly since those early waves. And since then, there's been a world of development to drastically set the newer figures apart. I really do appreciate that Mattel has done so much to keep this line going, and I really hope that we continue to see it go on for many years to come. Even if that's not the case and it were to all end tomorrow, I can still safely say that Masterverse has done a great job of trying to give us a varied and interesting selection of characters from across many different continuities and source materials. But that's enough from me. With all that out of the way, if you enjoyed today's content, that you do take just a moment to hit that like button. It's really going to help the video to get shared out to so many more people, and it helps me to keep ads, and it helps me to keep paid promotions and things of that nature out of these videos. Hitting the subscribe button would also be a tremendous help to our channel and really encourage me to continue making videos in this same style. And if you really enjoyed today's content, there's always the thank you button. And as always, God bless you and yours, and I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.